Excellencies, ladies, gentlemen, friends, welcome to the final session of this World Economic Forum in Africa 2010 edition. Before starting the session, I would like, on behalf of all of you, to express our condolences to the family and to the people of Nigeria, which has lost its president, Yar'Adua, who, as you know, passed away yesterday. I also would like to use this opportunity, President Kikwete, to thank you, to thank all the people who were involved yesterday for such a wonderful evening. I think we will never forget it. I just proposed to the President that we have a continuation of this evening, of yesterday's evening, this evening.
You're welcome.
I don't have to introduce the participants of this panel. It's a great pleasure to have President Zuma also joining this final session. And of course, you have met on a number of occasions our co-chairs who performed so well in the last 36 hours. So what we want to do is to go immediately into a discussion round, and I will ask questions which are very related to the specific function and experience of each of the panelists here. And let me ask you, President Kikwete, there was a lot of discussion during the last days about the integration of the young generation, the importance of young leaders, young political leaders, the competition which you have by a growing economy in terms of crowding out the best talents. Now, my question to you is, what can Africa really do to nourish the future generation of political leaders?
It's quite a question. What can Africa do to nourish the future generation of political leaders? One, for sure, there is no political school you can take them. I wish there was one where we can take them to study. I think one thing is for the existing political leadership to have faith in the younger generation, to have trust in them, to give them the opportunity let me take my example. I had interest in politics, but student politics. And then party politics. I was in the youth movement, I was student leader, school, the university. But after finishing university, we were given the opportunity to work with the party, to continue as member of the Youth League of the party. But our founding president, the late Mwalimu Nyerere, identified some of us who were given the opportunity to work closely within the corridors of power, the main decision-making organs of the party. And in the process, we learned how things are done. So I think one important thing is for us in leadership is to give opportunity to our young men and women who have interest in politics, give them the opportunity, give them tasks. In the process, they learn the ABCs of leadership. And when we retire, then they will be ready to take over. Otherwise, there is no school where you can take them. It's only being given the opportunity. If I was not given the opportunity to exercise leadership at the levels that I can manage until I was able to be taken to higher levels, then became deputy minister, then minister, and then it ended up being president, I wouldn't have been here. So I think from my experience of being given the opportunity to exercise, to do tasks, to be trusted, to be entrusted with responsibilities, and in the process you build the confidence, you build the capacities to be able to do better. This is all that I can say.
Thank you, Mr. President. Maybe one day the time is ripe to create a kind of school of government, African school of government, similar to what exists, for example, in the United States with the Kennedy School of Government. That's an idea for the future. And I know, looking at our Indian friend, India is going very much into this direction to develop world-class schools. Let me turn to President Zuma.
No, but school of government, we are working on building that one. We are working on building that one. But I'm not sure if it's going to help us create the leaders.
If it's a world-class school, certainly.
It's world-class. We're working with some institutions in the UK to build that one. We have already identified land for the construction of this school of government.
To be located where?
Located about south of Dar es Salaam. We're located somewhere, a place we call Kuranga. We identify a piece of land. We're going to build a school there. We're at very high stage of development of constructing this school.
President Zuma, there's a lot of discussion about global governance, and now Africa has found a voice in the world community also through the G20. And I was also impressed how Africa expressed itself in one voice, for example, in Copenhagen. Now, how do you see the future of G20? Many people say the G20 was a very good instrument in order to fight the crisis, but will have difficulties to be a global design instrument for common policies. How do you see the G20, and how do you see let's say, the balance between the G20, which is a relatively exclusive group, compared to the General Assembly of the United Nations, which integrates everybody?
Well, I think G20 is an important instrument, I think, for the global matters, not only economic matters. It does discuss other matters, like the one you mentioned, which was discussed in Copenhagen, the climate change, and other big issues. But I think the emergence of many organizations like G20, I think it indicates the need globally to change things, to reconfigure old organizations, which is important in terms of accommodating other countries, particularly the developing countries, that have not been having a say in critical institutions that exist multilaterally in the world. The G20, I think, is beginning to meet that kind of challenge. As you know, of course, G20 does not have sufficient representation from Africa. And therefore, this very important region is underrepresented there. But I think it is in the process of accepting the reality of reconfiguring the institutions in the world. But also, I think it reflects the UN itself, that UN as an old institution, it does need to reform. You would not have needed perhaps a G20 if the UN was, in a sense, in keeping with the challenges and the issues of today. I think the UN tends to stay to the old kind of system that existed in the 40s. The world has changed. It's not changing. If anything, it is resisting to change. And therefore, because there are pressing issues, you have to have this, the G20, for an example. As you know, before, it was G8. But it was rather too narrow. And I think the fact that there was G8 plus 5, it indicated this need. I think now there has been an acceptance that we need a G20, which, in a sense, reflects a little bit broader representation than G8. But is that sufficient enough? Of course, some people say almost the broader representation of middle economic countries are now represented. So therefore, you can say there is a representation. There are regions. Are they represented sufficiently? I don't think so. I think Africa is one more critical example, not just in G8, in a number of institutions. Africa still falls very short of the representation. But I think what we should recognize is the current demand of globalization, that you cannot just say we are globalizing in many other things, but not in organizations, institutions, and in terms of representation. So whilst one would say it's a very important thing, it is giving us an opportunity, it has addressed the issues, as you have said, of the financial crisis, for an example, worked out quite important issues, but it is a direct challenge to a multilateral institution that governs the world, the United Nations. I think we should realize it's an outdated institution. It needs new representation. That's what G8, in my view, represents.
In the context, if I just may follow up with one question, in the context of the G20, you have seen a kind of coalition emerging between China, India, South Africa, and Brazil. How do you feel about it? Is this, let's say, a kind of structure which will be very predominant in the future?
Well, definitely yes, in this sense. Once again, I think the emergence of India, China, Brazil, South Africa, I think indicates the reality that there are emerging countries, emerging economies, which are not just there in theory. I think the emergence of these economies does make an impact in the economic life of the world, does indicate that the South is indeed emerging as a powerful market, as a powerful area. You cannot ignore it. Now, precisely because there is no space opened multilateral, you then have the kind of regional groupings coming in and emerging as important players in the economic life. I'm sure the markets, the economic activities in the South are growing, and you cannot ignore that. I think it is not correct to say the institutions, the manner in which the world looked like 30, 40 years ago will remain looking like that irrespective of the growing economic countries that are emerging. And if, therefore, they are not accommodated, so to speak, you are likely to find a tendency where they'll be coming together because they are in a same kind of basket. Yeah. And therefore disadvantaged, not being in a position to be part of a decision making about the affairs, and yet their economies are growing. You are likely to find those ones growing, and if it is not properly handled, you might find those becoming more dominant, but with the kind of structures where they are not taking decisions, that might lead to other kind of things where they might feel we need to establish our own powerful institutions. I think we need to be careful that we balance things in terms of the organization that represents the regions of the world.
Thank you. Jürgen, you were participating in many discussions on agriculture, and agriculture is a decisive element for Africa's future. And I think particularly in the context of Tanzania, the Kilimo Kwanzana, I think, Kwanza project. What is your take up now concerning the future of Africa's agriculture, concerning the relationship between agriculture and environment? I think this is a very important factor. What do you take home as learnings, and what is your advice to the...
Firstly, I'm extremely pleased by the fact that agriculture is now center staged, not only in Africa, but in the world. And as I'm a born and raised farmer myself, and heading up a company which are also then actively in aggregation, it's very important for me then to impressed to see the dedication that you have now in the African countries. And I had the pleasure of being together with President Kikwete in a workshop where we discussed leveraging public partner investments for African agriculture growth. And normally the presidents only give a speech and spend probably 10 minutes. He was sitting there for 2 hours. And he was really actively engaged, and he was able also then, together with his Minister for Agriculture, to drive this in, as you said, Klaus, along the Kilimo Kwanza. And we were able to then, together with local farmers, and 8 international companies have signed up and said that we want to drive a southern agriculture growth corridor for Tanzania. And it's extremely interesting to see that we could use this platform to really achieve something also which is real. And we will, President Kikwete, we will together show that this is possible. And we will then report on this in the next month to come. And I'm extremely pleased by the dedication. And that's what we need, dedication.
Thank you. Now, Madam, you are so committed to the issue of urbanization. That's your UN task. And Africa has one of the largest urban centers in the world. Do you think that enough attention is given to this issue, particularly in terms of finding solutions for sustained urban development?
Thank you. Let me reiterate that thank you, Professor Swab. Let me reiterate that maybe to revisit what was said earlier, that Africa is a continent on the move. 37% of Africans have now crossed into cities and towns. By 2030, Africa will no longer be a rural continent. 51% of Africans will be living in urban areas. So those really are the facts. And on that basis, my job in the United Nations, and President Zuma, you are aware of this, I was with you when we launched the African Ministerial Conference on Housing and Urban Development. We were hosting the conference in Durban. And really, as a United Nations, I would like to believe that we still have a life. Since the Deputy Secretary General is sitting there, I hope that the institution is relevant. But in the case of urbanization in Africa, for example, it took me as a street campaigner to get President Chisano to table the issue at the ministerial, at the summit. Because the awareness of what I would call rural romanticism, that Africans are going to remain happily as indigenous societies in the countryside, is not borne out by the facts. Like all peoples, there is economic transformation. And particularly now, with the leadership doing what is right, focusing on agriculture, it means even more Africans will not be needed on the farms. I think, Ole, you know very well that with agricultural productivity, people have to move out of farms. So I would like to say that these people are now coming to urban areas. It is true that also in Africa here, I have to hasten to add that we have what we call premature urbanization. Urbanization that is not accompanied by agricultural productivity. So we have food shortages, we don't have enough employment in the cities, and the rest you know. So yes, I would like to put it very briefly that we have therefore to foster a balanced territorial development. We have to invest in the rural areas, but also promote the urban sector. We cannot ignore the majority of our people now languishing in the slums and squatter settlements. In this regard, I note, for example, Prime Minister Raila Odinga, with whom we have been working in Kenya on the Kenya Slum Upgrading Program. Because in Nairobi, 1/3 of the people live in one settlement called Kibera. So I would like to say, therefore, with the leaders of Africa, only the leaders, Professor Swab, can make a difference. In the case of Kenya, I asked the president to be the patron of our slum upgrading program. Because if they are not in the driver's seat, you cannot move to scale. There is a lot of goodwill, civil society, women groups, youth groups trying to improve the situation. But unless the leaders of the land are in the driver's seat, we shall not get the investment we need to foster a balanced territorial development in terms of infrastructure, in terms of developing secondary towns, what we call rural growth nodes. Therefore, these agricultural corridors which you are developing, they will need urban centers. Because if you don't have secondary towns, if you don't have a market for agricultural surplus, everybody will have to remain as a peasant. So basically, it is about investment, but about leadership and understanding, not to romanticize that everybody will remain as an indigenous person.
Now, Pat, energy is another critical element of development, and it's also in somewhere in the nexus of public and private efforts. How do you feel coming out now of the meeting? Do you feel there's a good balance in terms of public-private partnership? Do you think there's enough support to develop energy very fast here in Africa? What is your take home?
Klaus, it's well known that Africa is blessed with wonderful resources for creating energy, from oil and gas, 10%, over 10% of the world's oil and gas reserves, and that's a growing percentage. We have wonderful hydro potential in parts of the continent, and we have a whole new ballgame to play in terms of green energy. We have ideal conditions for solar in various large tracts of the continent. Hydro again, even biofuels, carefully on biofuels, because we don't want to get into the food security debate, but there are opportunities. Mozambique is a wonderful opportunity where biofuels can be produced without negative consequences. But to your question, too much of the energy, particularly in the hydrocarbon energy, is exploited by exporting it. It's done by foreign investors and taken to the United States and Europe and other parts of the world. And Africa has 1 billion people. The market for the energy products of that nature should be in the African continent. And so the partnerships, some partnerships are hugely successful, but we need more of them. Again, I say we tend to spend too much time and our energy focusing on all the barriers, and I think the much better model is to focus on real investments where there are energy sources, there are markets, and use that business investment decision to remove some of the barriers that are preventing these partnerships that are absolutely critical. So we need the political will, and I certainly get much more of a sense of that after the last few days. We need the business will. We need the visionary leadership. Thank you. We need that visionary leadership, and I'm very much encouraged to see how much of that visionary leadership we've seen from our presidents and other leaders in the last couple of days. But give business reasonable certainty, reasonable predictability, free us up to do that, and we will go after those investments. We need to do more things in these partnerships, Klaus. So that would be my plea, that we just get on and do more of this stuff.
Which means that if the regulatory framework is right, you would see much more also foreign investments in the energy field. Is that correct?
Yes, I do, but I think there's a chicken and the egg situation here. If there's the visionary leadership and the resources are there and the market is there, if one waits for the nth version of a regulatory framework, too much time is wasted. Go after the investment decision, and we have had examples of that, and the regulatory framework starts getting developed as we go along. And I think African companies should be leading the way. We as a single African company in the energy field spend over $2 billion a year, every year. And in many places there aren't appropriate regulatory frameworks, but we help create those by making the investment decision.
Thank you. Ajay, when you compare India and China, both are substantial partners, but I know there was a dinner taking place about Indian-African partnership, and some criticism were, or I would say not criticism, but some comments were made why the Chinese are more successful in Africa compared to India, which is a much more closer neighbor, which has the same growth rate. So what can be done, in your opinion, to enhance Indian-African partnerships?
Well, actually, the thing that we were discussing that evening, which is a very interesting discussion, was that the key issue is that as far as China is concerned, the government of China is deeply involved in making a lot of the investments in Africa. And from India, it's the private companies that are actually coming in and doing a lot with Africa. But what was really felt was that various private companies from India must actually come and partner with Africans and make the difference, rather than just come and exploit the issues here. Now, the second point that was discussed was that in India still, there is lack of understanding of Africa. I think that's really where a lot of work needs to be done by organizations like CII and WEF, so that we can make Indian corporations to come and invest more and more with Africans and jointly develop the potential of Africa. Some of the areas that we really identified were areas like capacity building. Now, capacity building can be in the areas of creating the basic scientific and technical education capabilities. In addition to that, the idea was that we should look at vocational training as well, because that is what will create jobs. And lastly, India has taken quite a leadership position in ICT. can we bring all our experience, our knowledge to bear upon creating strategies with African governments so that they don't make the same mistakes we made earlier, and we actually help them leapfrog what we have actually done in that area. And lastly, if you look at transparency and governance, a lot of work has been done in India around e-governance. How can we bring the best practices, software, technology to actually work with various governments and help in that area?
Thank you. President Kikwete, one of the role models for possible regional cooperation is the recently signed East Africa Common Market Agreement. But when you look at those agreements, it requires the willingness of national governments, at least in the medium and long term, really to give up parts of national sovereignty. Now, do you feel that the African governments are really ready to go into the direction of a much more regional approach, even if it entails to give up some parts of sovereignty?
African governments ready to give up part of the sovereignty? I can say yes, because in the whole of Africa, you find there are regional economic groupings. In West Africa, there is ECOWAS. There is one organization for Central Africa. There is another one for Southern Africa. We have one also for East Africa. And then we have one that cuts across the whole region from Egypt to some Eastern African countries and Central African and Southern African countries, COMESA. Of course, there isn't one for the Northern Africa. They had the Maghreb Union, but it's not functioning, probably because all these are oil-rich countries. They don't need to come together. But so itself coming into regional integration is a expression of readiness to give up sovereignty to some extent. So what have we been doing in East Africa? We agreed, we moved from cooperation to integration, and we agreed our entry point is going to be the customs union. We removed tariffs for goods crossing the borders. We erected a common external tariff. We've done that for 5 years. Now, beginning this January 1st this year, we have reached its apex. Now we have started towards the common market, where we are now discussing. The issue here is free movement of goods and services and rights of settlement and relocation. We agreed. So the fact that we agreed is itself a commitment to vest part of our sovereignty into this common entity. Of course, in the discussion, you'll have, there are some things that are easy, there are some things that are not easy, but you have got to move slowly, or you have got to move judiciously. And this is, I think, the path that we have chosen in East Africa. Those that are easy to be implemented are the ones that we have started with. Those that need far more time for discussions are the ones that we continue to discuss. Because don't start with those that create a lot of disagreement, and then you may lose everything. So I don't see any evidence of refusal to lose sovereignty. I'm seeing a lot of commitment. It's the same way with Southern African Development Community, where there is now a discussion on moving into preferential trade area. Again, countries will lose part of their sovereignty to this community of theirs. West Africa, they've done a number of things in terms of movement of people across the borders. So I'm saying there is realization that regional integration is the way to go. And to attain regional integration, nations have to vest part of their sovereignty into that regional entity. And so far things are moving ahead.
So it's very encouraging what you are saying, and also the policy first to do the easier things and to attack the more difficult things later. But I read recently a very interesting comment which says in the 20th century, patience was a virtue. In the 21st century, impatience is a virtue, which just expresses that things are moving so fast that you have to be always impatient in order to get things done. But let me ask the most important question. President Zuma, what do you expect from the forthcoming World Cup except that South Africa wins? And to substantiate a little bit my question, I mean, it was a very important global event. How much do you feel those events are useful, even necessary, in order to mobilize national energy behind a specific purpose?
Of course, you will appreciate that the first important thing is that South Africa must win the World Cup. South Africa, together with our brothers and sisters in the continent, I think we've put something like 6 teams to ensure that the cup does not leave. If it falls through the cracks from South Africa, there are other countries ready. We want to keep it here. That's an important thing indeed. Well, firstly, the World as it always does, into any country that it goes to, it brings in new economic activities, because a country has to prepare itself, and therefore it has to invest in the infrastructure and other things. This is what we have done in South Africa. I think since the announcement was made that we're going to host, we started working in preparation for hosting the World Cup. We invested in the infrastructure, very specifically related to the World Cup. We built a new stadium, and we have invested on a number of other things in anticipation to receive the world. That investment has been so important that when there was the economic meltdown, it actually helped to cushion the South African economy, because there was an investment on an important area. We therefore said to ourselves, what happens when the final whistle is blown at the end? What will remain as a legacy? We have decided to ride on this wave by investing more on the general infrastructure that we wanted in any way to do. Part of it was already tired, and we believe that it will also help us to link with the region. So the infrastructure, which has been the bigger cry, has in fact been helped by the Soccer World Cup. We are better off than what we were before. So we believe that the World Cup will leave a very important economic legacy in our country. not just South Africa, I think even in the neighboring countries. So that's what we believe will remain within South Africa. But also, the World Cup, I think, has helped to expose those who have never come to Africa, to see that Africa is in fact ready to do anything that other countries can do in the world. You'll recall that when South Africa won the hosting of the Soccer World Cup, there were a lot of doubts and skepticism that was there. Can Africa host it? People believed Africa was not ready to do so. I think we've proved a point. We were ready 4 months before, ready to host it. And I think those who would come will certainly realize that Africa is not just the bushes and the mountains only. It's actually as good as some places in Europe. What I would want to say, taking advantage of your question, is actually to invite the world to come, to participate, to be part, to see how Africa is ready to do anything that can be done in any part of the world. And I'm sure that invitation will be honored, except that they will have to buy tickets so that they can enter the stadiums. Thank you.
No, I think all those participants who have been at the meeting in Cape Town last year, when we were in the half-finished stadium, and there were still many questions, I think we have to congratulate the President and all the people involved for the tremendous work which has been done and the achievements, and we wish them certainly also the necessary success. Now, I will turn again to all of the panelists with the question, what should be now the message going out of this meeting to the world? But before addressing myself to the panelists here, I would like to integrate the audience. And I will do it, since the forum is a multi-stakeholder organization, I will do it with a very targeted approach. And I will, let me see, is there any global change maker in the room? Yes, can you give the microphone to one of those young people? What should be the message going out of this meeting? And identify yourself again, please.
Thank you very much, Professor. My name is Alex Kamukama, and I'm a global change maker from Uganda. A few minutes back, we had a meeting with Professor Schwab, and we were telling him how appreciative we are of being invited to this forum. We've interacted with many gentlemen and ladies, and we've learned a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, we are looking up to you. We want to be where you are, and even better. We plan every day to make our lives better, to make the lives of youth out there better. And thank you for inspiring us. We are so glad and proud to be here. Thank you.
And what should be the message going out of this meeting?
Yes, our message is one. When we're up here planning, we are planning on higher levels. Let us start thinking about the people in the communities. When we're talking about extreme poverty, let us look at families who have taken days without eating. When we're talking about health care, let us look at villages where you have to travel miles to get services. When we're talking about economic empowerment, let us look at the programs, the structures we are really designing. Are they really reaching the people we want to reach? Or are we just using protocol and words of higher governance? Ladies and gentlemen, let us put ourselves down to the ground and think high up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's give the floor to someone from civil society. I always felt civil society has a strong voice. Ah, here is one.
Thank you. My name is Moon. I'm a social entrepreneur from Kenya. I think the strong message going out from this forum should certainly emphasize the fundamental importance of developing the agriculture sector in Africa, and most especially the smallholder agriculture sector. But I think also we need messages about how we make that a reality. And I would plead that we put a lot more resources behind, first, the development of technologies and solutions which are suitable for smallholder farmers across the continent. And secondly, that we put a great deal more resources, both governmental and private sector, behind developing the market, behind promoting the adoption of these technology solutions. Then I believe that with those two things together, we can really mobilize the rural people of Africa to make much more productive use of the skills and assets that they already have within them. There's a huge reservoir of untapped and as yet immobile human and social capital waiting to be expressed there. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take an academic. Any voice? Yeah, over here.
Good morning or afternoon. My name is Peter Bankole from Pan-African University in Nigeria. I believe the central message here is that we need quality education in Africa to help us understand very clearly that we need to trade amongst ourselves. We need to make Africa truly one and help ourselves first before others can help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any young global leader who would like? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Anand, and I'm a 2010 YGL. I think one of the messages that I think was coming back again and again is the notion of is Africa ready for change or not? And I think really the YGL discussions, as well as what we got to participate in the WEF summit, was around whether it is message of Julius Nyerere or other leaders who've inspired Tanzania a lot around sort of being the change rather than expecting the change to happen somewhere else, and around picking small things that are within our circles of influence, whether it's technology or the political world. We had tons of YGL representation politically, social entrepreneurs, is to pick something within our zone of influence and be the change rather than wait for change to come from somewhere else. And so that theme was pretty resonant among the YGL discussions, I thought.
Thank you. Let's take a women leader. Any women leader? Yes, please.
My name is Asha Rose Migiro, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. Last night, I danced in tune with His Excellency President Zuma. But this morning, allow me to respectfully differ on the relevance of the United Nations. And this is also by way of message. The United Nations provides the multilateral setting where we come together to address global issues of our time, be it climate change, food security, financial crisis. And as I leave this meeting, I see that the United Nations can provide once again that stage where we will recommit ourselves to improving the state of the world. And all the problems that we got occasion to discuss, be it the girl effect, investing in the girl, be it the question of leadership, which was led this morning by Tumbo Makabu, all these can be taken up at the level of the United Nations, working together with member states. We do realize that there is a challenge for reform, and I want to believe that President Zuma is talking about the reform of the Security Council. This is something that is going on at the intergovernmental level at the United Nations right now, and the UN Secretariat stands ready to support member states in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. I think it was a very important point. Let me turn, is there any social entrepreneur in the room? Social entrepreneur? Yeah, here. Can you?
Hello, I'm Shona from South Africa. I just want to reiterate that we just do need, as Africans, to be the change we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me now turn to, no, I forgot. I should take a foreign investor. I think it's very important to have a foreign investor. Yeah. Please stand up so you get the microphone.
Sula Proxinos, International Housing Solutions. I'm a foreign investor in one sense, and I'm cheating a little because I'm actually South African in another sense, but I represent a group of foreign investors, all of whom have invested in Africa for the very first time through our fund. And what I think is really interesting is not only did they make the commitment to Africa, they made the commitment to residential, and they made the commitment to low and moderate income. So for me, what I think is really important is that if you can get the right message out there, even if there are a number of firsts at the same time, you can really attract foreign investors. And as we've been working with our foreign investors, who, by the way, have committed about $230 million to low and moderate income housing in South Africa, some percentage of which can go to the rest of Africa, they have continued to affirm their commitment that this was a good financial, and I stress financial because these are not philanthropic investors, financial investment, and they continue to use our platform and our meetings in South Africa as an opportunity to see what other opportunities there are in the country and on the continent.
Thank you. Let me take maybe a last voice from the audience, a media leader. And no, I will finish with you. But a media leader, is there any media leader in the room? No? Any media leader? Yes, please. Yeah.
My name is Mkumbu Ali. I'm with the Daily News in Dar es Salaam. I think the message that we expect that we want to put out from this meeting, from the point of view of media, is that the discussions that have taken place in the last 3 days should lead to actionable plans that will move Africa a step further. So the next meeting should not be repeating what we have discussed here in this forum. Thank you.
I would like to add as my own wish to the media, having followed Africa now for 20 years, there is still a very deep misconception about Africa in the world. And I think the media have a great responsibility to highlight the progress which has been made and the potential of this continent. So that would be my wish to the media. But now the final word from the audience. And please. Asa. Yeah. Here it comes.
Yes, thanks.
So strong, I would like to pay tribute also in your capacity as the chair of our Africa Council in the World Economic Forum.
Clause, that belongs to Miss Michelle, but I am a member of that council.
Yeah.
I'd like to use the opportunity that we have with the private sector and the great leaders of the continent to stress the fact that in rethinking Africa's growth strategy, it really has to be about jobs now. It really must be about jobs. And if we find a common agenda around growth that delivers jobs, then the role of government would become clear as the facilitator and the enabler and the remover of all the blocks that stand in the way of private sector. And then private sector will understand that they will miss out big time if they do not learn the lesson that Africa can surely deliver incredible opportunities. It happened with the telecom sector. Don't let the energy sector pass you by, or any other sector, particularly agriculture. It's about jobs.
Can I follow up with one question? There was relatively little discussion about the role of the international development organizations in Africa, and you are deeply involved. Can you just say one word about it?
I think the most important word is that everyone's got to change. You can't do things the same way. And so as the governments change, as the private sector changes, and as the citizens take a greater responsibility and role in pursuing their destiny in Africa, the development institutions will have to change accordingly. And I think that that change results in a greater sense of ownership of the development agenda by the citizens. And social accountability must be at the heart of everything we do on the collaborative partnership agenda.
The World Bank is going into this direction.
Oh, definitely. I'm responsible for Africa region, and that's the way we're thinking.
Exactly. Now let me turn to the panel. And Ajay, do you want, what is the message you feel should go out of this meeting?
Well, Klaus, when we started our company, what did we say? Let's take a bunch of young people and put their minds on fire, and the rest will happen. So I think fundamentally, what I would like to say is that we should believe in the demographic dividend of Africa and make human capital capable, and then entrepreneurship will take over.
Pat?
Klaus, mine builds on what Ajay has said. We need to believe more in ourselves. Of course, we need the world to help us. We have our challenges. But as we've seen from the financial crisis, the Western world doesn't have all the answers. I think the critical elements to unlocking Africa's potential are less to be found in the banking halls of the United States and the committee rooms in Washington and in the government offices of Western governments, and more to be found in the markets, street markets of Lagos, in the township saving schemes of Soweto, what's happening outside in this wonderful country in the streets of Dar es Salaam. Let's see more of that type of thing happening, and we will then create the jobs that you so correctly point out. This is what we need to grow. So my message, Klaus, is Africa needs to believe more in Africa.
Thank you. Madam Tibel, you come.
Well, I think that as by way of summarizing such a rich discussion coming from African leaders, I can only go back to the founding father of this nation, Mwalimu Nyerere, when he said, and I quote, "We should be running while others are walking," end of quote. So I would like to say that that philosophy still holds for Africa, but the question is, are we walking the talk? I doubt it. I would like to say that as Africans, we must realize that actually we have been crawling while the others are running. So Mwalimu's advice to us, we shall have to put our act together so that we run, and we have to run because we are left behind while others are walking. And that will not happen unless we have a change, a mindset has to change. Africa cannot afford to have half of its population called women not fully utilized. Neither can Africa afford to have 60% of its young people left behind. So I would like to say that we have to develop an all-hands-on-deck mentality, that there is a role to be played by everybody. And again, to remember what Mwalimu said, and I quote again, it can be done, you play your part. So on that note, let me also congratulate President Kikwete and you, Professor Sob, for the courage of bringing this conference to Dar es Salaam. But it is clear that when everybody has played their part, here we are. Speaking from the United Nations, I would like to say that we are prepared to make our value addition, and that is basically to call a spade, sometimes to name and shame when things are not proper. So I would like to emphasize that empowerment, enablement, and I think the Mkumbwa Ali was right, and I would like to concur with you to say, in the final analysis, it is the ability for follow-up and follow-through. It is about local action for global goals or regional goals. Thank you.
Jürgen?
As I said in my opening message, that it's extremely excited to see the dedication from the politicians here, not only in Tanzania, but in Africa. And we also all have heard about the importance of agriculture and farming. I think takeaway, and for me, it's and all of us to accept and understand the fact that farming is business, the whole chain in it. And for me, takeaway is put words into action.
Thank you. President Zuma.
Thank you. First, I can't leave the United Nations unattended to. No, the only point, we are not saying United Nations is useless. I think it does a lot of things. Not only the Security Council, there are areas that need to be looked at differently. I came across a very serious experience as a mediator in Burundi on the conditions that have been put. What are the things that the UN will then send its troops to maintain peace where there is peaceful agreements? The conditions are outdated, are 1994 conditions. We had to create an African force because United Nations refused. Well, they've got very specific conditions. Just to illustrate that it's not just Security Council only. There are many things in the UN that needs to be changed. Of course, the Security Council is critical, because that's a final decision making. I can't explain why people can't change. Why do they hold to the veto power on their own and nobody else? Why should we need the veto power now? I mean, those matters need to be looked at. And if those matters are not looked at, then bigger players of the globe will come together and take certain decisions. So they are undermining the very institution. That's a point I was making, my good sister. Finally, Professor, I would want to say to those who are coming from out of Africa, Africa is a destination for investment, is a future regional globe for doing business. We have 1 billion people who need to be unlocked. And I think Africa has such a potential that if I was an investor out there, this would be the time to come in, to invest, because in a short space of time, Africa is going to be the place for doing business globally. But I would like to say to ourselves as Africans, and echo what my brother was saying, let us believe in ourselves. Let us do things that we believe are difficult to do. Simple matter of opening the borders to ourselves so that we can trade. We prefer, as different countries, big, medium, and small, to trade with other regions outside of the continent, not with ourselves, and therefore disadvantage us on the very things that we do. I think we should have faith to ourselves and do business with ourselves. We must agree that we need to lay the infrastructure that connects Africa to itself. We can do better. In fact, if we did so, I am convinced we will not have to call for foreign direct investment. It will come on its own, because that will create a favorable environment for us to be active economically. Thank you.
And now to our host, President Kikwete.
Well, once again, Professor, let me thank you on behalf of the people of Tanzania for having trust in us and for giving us this huge task. At the beginning, it looked impossible, but I'm always an optimist. I say nothing is impossible, everything is doable given the right conditions. So thank you very much for giving the honor of hosting this World Economic Forum on Africa, which for the first time is being held outside Cape Town. I thank also President Zuma for not taking offense for not taking offense that this World Economic Forum that from birth has been taking place in Cape Town for the first time has moved out of Cape Town. And I'm so happy that you are coming here and attending from the very first day to this last minute is an assurance that you have been supportive, and indeed you have been supportive, because if you had not been supportive, it would have been very difficult for Professor Schwab to move the World Economic Forum meeting from Cape Town to Dar es Salaam. So that's all I will thank you. Because it has been an experiment. Can this conference be held outside Cape Town? So I think what we have performed has really given credence that it can be held outside Cape Town. If Dar es Salaam has been able, I'm sure there are many more bigger towns, better resourced than Dar es Salaam, which can host this important meeting on African economic issues. Well, with regards to what is the message, I would simply say that reading World Economic Forum committed to improving the state of the world. That's the message. I would like to say that with regards to Africa, the World Economic Forum should continue to work towards moving Africa from the periphery of the global economy to the center of the global economy. Because if there is any predicament to Africa's development, is this particular state of affairs. Africa is the periphery of the global economy. It cannot be left to continue this way. Africa has the least share of world trade. 3.5% of global merchandise export is from Africa. 3.5% only. Africa has the least share of FDI flows, 0.96. Africa is not integrated to the global financial markets. Well, it helped us during the global financial crisis because we are not integrated, so we were least affected. But we cannot continue to be outside, to be left out of the global financial markets. Africa is not integrated into the global super information highway. Maybe you don't know, but the whole of eastern coast of Africa was not connected to the submarine optic fiber network. It was only last year that the cable landed Dar es Salaam, Maputo, Mombasa, Djibouti. So if you're not connected to this, all our connections have been through the satellite, and it has been so difficult. But if you're not connected, then you are left out of the ICT-based global economic developments. Africa remains predominantly primary producers and importers of industrial goods. My late professor of economics at the University of Dar es Salaam once said, we produce what we don't consume and consume what we don't produce. This is the state of the African economy. It cannot be left to continue this way. So we look forward to these meetings of the World Economic Forum to be catalysts, to move Africa from the periphery to the center of the global economy so that all of us can benefit equitably in this planet which we all call home. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. You can count on our commitment.
Thank you.
May I now ask the brains, the soul, and the heart behind this meeting, Catherine Tweedy, to close our summit here.
Thank you, Professor Schwab. I'll be very brief. Well, it certainly has been a fruitful few days together, and I can safely say that our first and certainly not last summit in East Africa has been a great success. And the results have been tangible. Among the many examples, an historic session on Zimbabwe yesterday, the new alliance of global companies who have come together and formally committed to support the government of Tanzania in its Kilimo Kwanza agriculture initiative, to the establishment of a new $20,000 fund by our young global leaders to finance solar lamp entrepreneurs in expanding their businesses. This meeting has been about making change happen, and I think, as someone said earlier, about being the change. I hope that all of you have found the sessions and discussions and unexpected moments not only productive but inspiring. And I would like to take this moment to thank the many people who've played an important role in bringing all the pieces together. A sincere thank you, Your Excellency, President Kikwete, the government of Tanzania, for your support. And again, a congratulations on hosting a spectacular cultural soiree at State House last night. To the city and people of Dar es Salaam for being gracious hosts and for being very patient with us, the Tanzania Police Service for their seamless operations, and to the more than 60 students who volunteered their time. To our co-chairs, thank you for being the ambassadors for this meeting. We greatly appreciate the financial support and contributions from our strategic and regional partners. To Publicis Live for operations and logistics. It is always a feat of wonder for me to see what you create. In particular, a very special thank you to the Africa Summit team, my colleagues, from the World Economic Forum, whose passion and commitment and minute attention to detail have made this meeting happen. Now, thinking forward, we are delighted to announce that next year's summit will return to Cape Town, thanks to the strong support of His Excellency President Zuma and the South African government. And we hope you will all join us in 2011 from the 4th to the 6th of May. But for 2012, we very much look forward to exploring new locations again, given the incredible success of this meeting. And while we're on this topic, I would like to wish President Zuma and South Africa the very best in hosting the FIFA 2010 World Cup in just over a month. I know that it will be a great success. As a very proud South African, I look forward to being there myself in person, and I hope that many of you will be joining us in celebrating this very historic moment for our continent. Unfortunately, I can't say I'm biased as to who I would like to see in the final. On behalf of the World Economic Forum, thank you for being here with us this week, for your valued contribution. I wish you safe travels and very much look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.